Okay. Welcome everyone. It's great to have you with us for the second IFRS 17 webinar we are hosting. My name is Magnus Fourie, and apart from being the opening act today, I'm a partner with the BDO Financial Services Division and Head of Insurance, and as well as the IFRS 17 project leader. Before we dive into the complex world of IFRS 17, allow me to tell you a bit more about the BDO Financial Services Division. We are a group of 120 specialized financial services partners, managers, and staff that are very ambitious. This team has relevant industry experience in banking, insurance, asset management, as well as other financial services areas. The BDO Financial Services Insurance team has 5 partners and 5 managers that are able to deliver to our clients. Our teams operate in a fully integrated manner, with our audit and or advisory, technical, accounting, and our financial services technology teams working together seamlessly on engagements. In fact, a third of our new first-year intakes operate in our financial services technology team. Nandi, if you can go to the next slide for me, please. So our first years that operate in the financial services team is there to support the increasing technology-focused manner that we deliver services to our clients. Next slide, please. The financial services technology team is led by Nevlin Moodley, and he's supported by 2 associate directors, Kevin Moodley and Justin Roberts, as well as 3 senior managers, Suman, Lisa, and Monique. There are 6 managers and supervisors and a team of 25 juniors. Can you go to the next slide for me, please? But back to what you're here for today, and that is IFRS 17 and the presenters. You cannot open a news site these days without an article about data security, and inevitably data breaches or leaks. The aim of today is to provide you with a brief overview of some of the data and technology challenges faced when implementing IFRS 17, as well as showcasing some of the tools we have. Once organizations are able to overcome the compliance requirements of the data required to implement the standard, there are numerous opportunities to utilize the newfound information in a meaningful way. This, however, does not come without serious risks. With you today, we have 5 highly skilled and qualified panelists. Shanaz Suleiman is an IFRS Technical Associate Director in the Financial Services Division of BDO South Africa, and she will take you through the link of technical accounting requirements to the data needs, before she will hand over to Nevlin Moodley, the partner and head of BDO Financial Services Technology. He will talk to you about data drivers, challenges, and the gaps after presentation on InsureHub by Daryl Sinek. He will then talk about data governance. Daryl is a tech solutions partner with BDO Canada, and after taking you through InsureHub, he will also talk you through AI and analytics. Supporting Daryl will be Alexander Ing. He will show you a presentation or actual live demo of InsureHub, as well as an underwriting AI demonstration. So just some housekeeping matters. We can go to the next slide, please. We will have a presentation of approximately an hour, followed by 30 minutes of Q&A. I encourage you to type your questions in the Q&A box, and these will be addressed at the end of the presentation. We will also post our contact details towards the end of the event. And for those of you who are interested in earning CPD hours, please complete the survey at the end of the presentation. Next slide, please. Before I hand over to the presenters, just a brief overview of some of the key IFRS 17 challenges. So we've already presented in our previous webinar just an overview of IFRS 17, and today we'll be focusing on data and technology. The coming together of actuarial, technology, and finance teams is really challenging the existing financial reporting operating model. The impact is usually felt across the entire organization, and the introduction of the new financial reporting matrix will result in new KPIs and potential challenges to the short and long-term management incentives. IFRS 17's roll-forward mechanism for disclosures result in reconciliation differences between the amounts in your general ledger, cash flows, and actuarial valuations. So insurers will not be able to produce financial statements that balance and are internally consistent. The solution involves greater collaboration between accounting and actuarial functions to move away from the legacy approach that was applied with limited alignment to a more cohesive, aligned, and fresh approach. And then what we're here for today, data and the quality thereof. The biggest driving factor leading to delays in implementation of IFRS 17 is data. You are most likely to have quite a few surprises when you start getting into the detail. And it's only when you perform a detailed analysis that you're able to identify where the root causes impacting data are coming from. It's extremely important to analyze data and understand any gaps identified as soon as possible. The systems need to be upgraded to be more dynamic, agile, and future-proof. Just go to the next slide for me. Thank you. When you registered, we asked you a couple of questions, and these are two of the answers, or three of the sectors that sections that we covered, and we have information for. And the first one in blue is we asked you how would you rate your data quality as of today? The majority of people rated it as I would say, average, with 1 being poor and 5 being excellent. But then when it comes to the POPIA readiness, or POPIA Act readiness, there's quite a few, close to 30% of the respondents believe that they weren't quite ready for the POPIA requirements. When it comes to the question, have you got an overall governance approach? 42% of the respondents indicated they do not have an overall governance approach yet. So I will leave you with these stats, and I'm going to hand over to Shanaz to lead us into the rest of the presentation, and I will speak to you again towards the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Magnus. That was a really good summary, and it's interesting to see where people are at in terms of the statistics you've just put up. I know this is a data and technology webinar, and that's the focus of our discussion this afternoon, but our IFRS 17 standard is very much driven from the accounting standard, and accounting really sets the scene and gives the parameters and the guidelines with which the actuarial team and the technology team then operates. So starting from there, I think my objective is to really set the scene for the data and technology team presentation that follows from this section. And it's really just talking to from an accounting perspective. On our previous webinar, there were two specific things that I touched on. The first specific principle I touched on was when our clients are implementing IFRS 17, they will have to select a measurement model, and there will need to be accounting policy decisions that are made. Now, the accounting policy choices that are made drives the measurement model that is selected, and it's also then speaking to what data do you have available. And the reason why the data becomes important is because when you look at the data that you need to source, there's three different specific components that our clients are experiencing when they're doing the IFRS 17 implementation and are focusing on. So first up, it's the specific manual accounting entries that are processed that may sit outside of the system itself, and that could be the manual journal entries. And then there's the expectations on cash flows, your future cash flows and your projections that comes from the actuarial space. And then there's the actual contract data that also then has to sit somewhere on a system within an insurer. So there's three different aspects of information that then pulls together that feeds into the current IFRS 4 measurement of the insurance liability. That liability is made up of specific components that sit within the measurement of the liability. So under IFRS 4, you would expect to see the terminology and the components such as your incurred but not reported line item, your unearned premium reserve, your outstanding claims reserve. That's the different components that make up the insurance liability, and that sits within IFRS 4. On transition, as you transition the insurance liability from the measurement methodology applied under IFRS 4 to IFRS 17, you'll be required to do a reconciliation to illustrate how that liability and the way that it's measured has behaved and transitions and moves over to the rules and the requirements of IFRS 17. And so it's really important to be able to understand the data that is sourced and underpins the existing calculations and what's needed, because that has to be then rolled forward and then reconciled to explain the data and how it's used in the measurement model and the calculations in terms of IFRS 17. And the way that that whole process is managed is extremely important, because from a perspective of the auditors, the transition process and the way the data flows into the calculation under an IFRS 4 model, whereas now how it's going to flow into the IFRS 17 calculations will need to be both auditable, it'll need to be traceable, there'll need to be a flow of evidence to show how the changes were managed. And then obviously with regards to the reporting timelines, they are quite tight. So this calculation will need to be done then in quite a tight time frame. And so as our clients start really getting into the process of moving the little puzzle pieces as you would put them together under an IFRS 4 calculation to where you've got an IFRS 17 calculation and you've got the liability for incurred claims and the liability for remaining coverage that make up your overall liability, that's going to be critical. So that's really to set the scene for why data and technology is become so important when we talk about IFRS 17. And to tell you more about that, I'm now going to hand you over to Nev, who's going to talk to you on IFRS 17 data.
Thank you, Shanaz, and good afternoon, everyone. I've got the pleasure today of talking to you about data and the technology systems that are going to drive IFRS 17. I think part of my experience so far has been, I've been involved previously on 2 of the large IFRS 9 transformation projects across 2 of the big 5 banks. And I've spent a lot of time over the last 10 years auditing specifically insurance companies and assisting with actuarial valuations in terms of data sourcing specifically. And I'm hoping today to share some insights with you. Next slide, please. So data is something very interesting, and while the slide is called IFRS 17 data challenges, I think you could very easily replace the IFRS 17 with insurance data challenges or global data challenges for that matter. And insurance has a very unique approach to this specifically because you've got the massive IFRS 17 transformation as well as a global data transformation that's going on. So you might ask, what is this global transformation around data? So currently we sit in a moment where there's a global battle going on in financial services specifically and insurance companies to actually try and leverage the maximum value out of their data for not only IFRS 17, but also for purposes of running their businesses, remaining profitable, remaining competitive, as well as making sure that no fintech comes and takes them out of business. And I think across all of the large corporates at the moment, we are seeing data as being one of the key strategic factors that are being used to define strategic ventures going forward in terms of which products to go through, how to drop your cost to income ratios. So across the insurance industry in South Africa and globally, we've seen that organizations are probably very immature in their overall approach towards data, all the way up to being very mature. And I think the data landscape has changed quite significantly, but for purposes of today, I'm just going to focus around IFRS 17 specifically. And I think one of the biggest things that we've seen is that actually sourcing the right data that you need to run IFRS 17 is probably a task on itself. And with all of the words and the verbiage around data being an asset, you might then ask yourself, especially sitting as an accountant, well, if it is an asset, where is its asset register? And I think that's problem number 1 that we are seeing across organizations, is that they don't have a defined view of all of the data that they have, being it structured or unstructured data, as well as whether the data that they have is public or not public. Now, that sort of links towards privacy as well to a certain extent, which I will touch on later, but not having an idea of the overall ecosystem of data that you have makes it very difficult in running out an IFRS 17 project, because there are going to be times throughout your project where there's going to be a serious need for data to be made available. And if it takes a long time to source that data, it could potentially put your IFRS 17 project way behind. And to share some of the challenges, maybe from the IFRS 9 transformation specifically, was that they didn't define data very early. So what happened was a lot of time was spent on the modeling without thinking about the sourcing of data. And when the data was actually then required, they moved the projects out because it took them far longer to actually source data than to actually build the model. So maybe step number one, and the biggest piece of advice we can provide at this point, is do not forget data as you are working on your model through the process. Data infrastructure and data architecture is also a very interesting point, because across the industry, I think everyone's moving towards cloud type environments, and the cost of hosting the large amounts of data that exist at the moment are very expensive. And going into the cloud, while beneficial, there are other risks that need to be managed from a privacy and security perspective, which we can most certainly assist with in terms of the overall process. But what we are seeing from clients is that the ability to scale your data infrastructure very quickly is a key requirement for operationalizing IFRS 17. And I think the other one, which I sort of touched on earlier, was maturing the organization's data maturity. Now, if you're working in an environment where data governance and the use of data for decision making is still in a very immature stage, you're going to have to reach a level of maturity far quicker than what a company that's already mature in the data space is. And that element of change management can potentially derail projects. From feedback received across the world from our European colleagues, as well as some of our colleagues in Australia, it's been seen that this is probably one of the greatest inhibitors to their projects at the moment, is that there's no appreciation that the data is absolutely critical. And to make this very simple for you, in terms of some of the insurance companies that we as auditors look at, we notice that currently modeling sits in a separate system, a separate environment, where you can acquire data from the actual underwriting systems, process it through, and do it almost off the record. Whereas in IFRS 17, it's actually pushing you towards a more integrated approach towards running your insurance business. So IFRS 17, while it is an accounting standard, it needs to almost become part of the way that you actually run your business. And I think that was one of the key learnings that we've picked up from the IFRS 9 project specifically, is that IFRS 17, while it is an accounting standard, it is a way of running your business. And that means there's a massive transformation in terms of your people, your process, as well as your technologies. Next slide. Okay, I'm just going to touch on a few of these points and just stress a couple for everyone with us today. One of the key learnings, and you'll hear me always referencing back to IFRS 9, because I think it's the last accounting change that had this amount of impact on an overall business. And one of the findings was that disclosure and reporting was specifically left out of the equation. Majority of the focus first went on the modeling, deciding on the accounting policy and doing your recognition type criteria, whereas no time was spent on disclosures. And then you had this last sort of 1 month to 2 month run where people hadn't decided what was the data that was needed for all of the disclosures. And I think it's very similar with IFRS 17. From looking through the illustrative disclosures that have been made available, there's going to be a high amount of data that needs to be acquired in order to provide and disclose in line with IFRS 17. So another key point to note is please focus on making sure that you don't forget about your disclosures when you're looking at data, and make sure that the data that you require is incorporated as part of your overall plan. I think increase in lowest level of data for valuation requirements, that's also another very interesting point, where on some projects we've seen some people say we need actuarial modeling data. So when you define what's your data requirement, they say we need actuarial modeling data. Now that can be a very large scope of different things that it could include. And if there's a specific field you're looking for that needs to drive the valuation and you haven't included it, or you haven't governed it, which I will touch on later, you could be in a problem where you don't have the data available because you weren't very specific in how you defined the specific data that you require. And the next one is around market data. I think South Africa, to a lesser extent, but more across Africa, the ability to get rating agency data and market data for some of the models that are being proposed is going to be a challenge. So almost deciding already what is the key market data that you're going to require for your modeling and being able to make sure you can access them as quickly, as easily, but most importantly, from a trustworthy source that has enough data to be giving a market view is going to become absolutely critical. I think across the African market at the moment, we are seeing lots of data aggregation startup businesses being created, very specifically for this reason, is that there's a lack of market data across the African continent in order to drive the types of models that are being prescribed by IFRS. And the last point I'm going to touch on very quickly is data integration and automation. A lot of these processes that need to happen, if you can automate them at the point at which you are building all of your solutions, it's going to save you so much of time in the future, because I think this standard is going to stay with you for a large number of years. And if it is going to be the way you're going to run your business, rather focus on automating the way these processes work. They'll provide you with massive savings in the long term. So almost a few rands spent today might save a few million rands in the future if you already start applying your mind in terms of how do I automate the processes to drive my IFRS 17 compliance as far as possible. Next slide. So this slide touches very briefly around the fact that IFRS 17, it's not only a change in accounting policy, it's a change in the way an insurance company needs to do business, but it's also a transformation project. And without just throwing big words around, a transformation project effectively means that you can't just look at systems and data. There's a people change management aspect that, if ignored, can resulting in you being way behind your overall project goals. And this is because people, in terms of enabling a data-enabled environment in order to drive IFRS 17, are going to have to change the way they work, change the way they use Excel. Because one of the key examples is, if you're planning as part of your IFRS 17 process to just download stuff into Excel, manually manipulate it and put it into a model, like what is currently being done in many cases, that's not going to be sustainable in order to meet the requirements of IFRS 17. So the big layer in terms of people change management becomes absolutely critical. And secondary to the people change management becomes process change management, because the way your existing processes run will need to be adapted for purposes of running out IFRS 17. And I think if those two pillars are adequately viewed and given the right attention, the systems and the data that are required to support this will be capital type expenditure, but will probably be in an environment that's more ready to accept the types of changes that need to come out from that. So I think, in order to summarize, while there's current gaps in IT processes, there's gaps in IFRS 17 requirements, they're all underpinned by the need that you have to have a transformation type project running across your organization that doesn't only focus on systems and data, but overall focuses on the people and the processes in order to support the overall transformation. And I think in touching on a lot of the stuff that we've touched on today, there's a lot of work that still needs to happen across all of the insurance companies across South Africa. We can share a view with you across the large insurers as well as the mid-tier insurers. I think the large insurers are spending a lot of time around governance type processes, as well as building their actuarial models and focusing on data. But maybe the more shocking stat is that in part of our engagement with a lot of the mid-tier type insurance companies and some of the smaller ones, is that IFRS 17 has just been something that a paper's been written on, or a impact of future accounting policies has been one of the things that have been considered. And I think if you haven't started your journey on IFRS 17, now is exactly the time to make sure you get into gear and start working on that process completely. So to take you through some of the technology solutions and some of our accelerators to help you on your journey of complying with IFRS 17, I'm going to hand over to Daryl.
Great, thank you, Nevlin. And if we could advance a couple slides, please. Excellent, just one. There we are. Perfect. In supporting a number of insurers, we've come to find that IFRS 17 is really not a typical project. Its scope is much broader, its impact is far more significant, and the level of expertise required is greater than your usual product. In supporting a number of clients, we find that this complexity increases as their number of product lines to which they serve into the marketplace increases. Often there's varying systems in play, and all of those need to be connected together as part of IFRS 17. However, it's not all bad news, and we have some strategies to make it a lot easier on everyone. Let's progress to the next slide. Insurers have been wrestling with a number of challenges within their IT ecosystems. Nevlin and Shanaz mentioned a number of those. And then along comes IFRS 17, and large cross-section of the IT landscape is really impacted. A number of challenges we have seen magnified by IFRS 17 is really limited systems agility to be able to connect and communicate across systems, a lot of disconnected systems in the process, still a lot of manual processes in play. Insurers are looking for solutions to tie it all together, and we've established a great platform based on the Microsoft platform to connect it all together and integrate it into your IT ecosystems. Next slide, please. BDO has established a data accelerator platform called InsureHub to address all of the data integration, the data management, the calculation, financial reporting needs of IFRS 17. It's a cloud-first architecture built on the Microsoft Azure platform, allowing clients to easily adopt it into their IT environments. It's built with all of the modern data management and data governance practices built in, accelerating your organization forward from a data maturity perspective. Let's take a look at some of these analytics capabilities in a bit more detail. Next slide, please. InsureHub not only meets the needs of IFRS 17, but puts in place a platform to significantly advance your data maturity and your data analytics capabilities. InsureHub consists of all of the key components required for IFRS 17 and a modern data architecture. It has a vast array of business intelligence capabilities such as dashboards, scorecards, investigative capabilities, self-service analytics, data mining, and the list goes on and on and on. Also, it puts in place the fundamentals for organizations to step into the world of artificial intelligence, equipping organizations with the capabilities to really leverage the data science domain for advanced workloads such as predicting risk, accelerating growth, and best serving clients and understanding varying client segments. Now let's take a look at the solution in action. Next slide, please.
Great, thank you, Daryl. I'm going to share my screen now and walk you through a demo of InsureHub. As mentioned, BDO has an accelerator, InsureHub, that reduces the amount of time an organization requires to prepare the data repository of all insurance data. What InsureHub looks like goes into a lot of technical details, but it's basically a library of reusable components built within the Microsoft Azure cloud to connect all of your systems together, right? So you can see all of those components on the left-hand side here. And this basically provides a flexible pipeline with which you can use all of the components to connect all of your insurance systems. To better illustrate this process, we have created a series of Power BI reports that are able to see all of the different inputs and outputs through InsureHub. What you're able to see are all of the different policy inputs, chart of accounts, portfolio groups, and IFRS 17 assumptions that are being imported into InsureHub. As well, you're able to see all of your policy inputs and actuarial system inputs into InsureHub. With all of your IFRS 17 data in one data repository, the IFRS 17 calculations can now be performed. InsureHub contains a configurable calculation engine for each of the components of IFRS 17. And you're able to configure these calculations based on your policy decisions. With the calculation engine configured, there's now a scheduled job that runs to perform the IFRS 17 process. And the output of the job is an audit history of all of the calculations that are performed so that auditor can ensure compliance with IFRS 17. With the calculations performed, the IFRS 17 reports and disclosures can now be generated. And we're able to see all of the IFRS 4 versus IFRS 17 comparative reports, including the balance sheet, deferred cost calculation, and loss component calculation. Also, you're able to get all of the adjusting journal entries to be fed back into your financial system. I will now pass it back to Nev, who will talk about data governance.
Thank you, Alex. I'm going to touch on POPIA and data governance, but let me just give you some comfort around the POPIA. So the InsureHub solution, we are currently spinning up an instance in South Africa of InsureHub to make sure that for the clients that we do run from an IFRS 17 perspective, that we do have a local instance running that is within South Africa, just to give you some comfort around the privacy of the data that's in that solution. And our Microsoft Cloud instance is compliant with BDO Global's policies in terms of information security, just to give you some comfort. But I'm going to start by talking about POPIA first. We're just going to go to the next slide. So around POPIA, I think based on the POPIA assessments or POPIA assessments that we have done across the insurance market, we are seeing some clients to be in a very mature state where they've effectively completed their gap analyses, and what they have done is they've started defining what their controls are from a design, implementation, and operating effectiveness perspective. But what we are also seeing through some of the gap assessments that we've done as late as 1 month ago is that they still have multiple gaps in their processes around privacy, because a lot of them weren't expecting the act to come into effect with 1 year to comply. Now, with the June year, by next year, June, having the need to be able to comply means that all gaps identified need serious remediation. And if you don't really have a view in terms of what your gaps are from a POPIA perspective, you're not going to know how to plug them. And the fines that are being proposed by the information regulator going forward are quite severe. And I think if you haven't looked at POPIA specifically, definitely start giving it a look and start making sure that you have comfort around the design, implementation, and operating effectiveness of your privacy controls going forward. But why this is relevant from an IFRS 17 perspective specifically is that a lot of the data that you are going to be using, there could be several third parties that you are sending the data to, there could be data that you are receiving back from third parties, and there could be a lot of movement of data within your organization, as an example, that does have private information on them or personal information on them. And if you don't understand this and understand how IFRS 17 impacts privacy, you could send your entire claims database, as an example, to a third-party service provider without ensuring that the right levels of privacy controls have been built in. And one of the key gaps which have come up around privacy assessments, not only for South Africa, but in the UK around their GDPR implementations and globally, is that third-party service providers have been ignored from the overall POPIA perspective. So definitely something for you to consider, and definitely a stream to consider for you as part of your overall IFRS 17 project in terms of how the privacy risk going to be managed with all these amounts of data moving from different systems into different platforms in order to drive your IFRS 17 calculations. Next slide. And I think we then move on to data governance. So for me, privacy is one of the building blocks of data governance as a whole. And I'm not going to make it too complicated because I've touched already on people, process, and technology earlier in terms of what the impacts are. And on each of those different pillars, of the 3 pillars, there is a privacy impact, but there's also a data governance impact that gets affected as a result of it. And one of the key things to bring to your attention, so what exactly is data governance? I mean, everyone talks about IT governance, everyone talks about risk governance or governance processes, etc. I think the insurance market and the financial services market is moving to a place where in the future, and when I say the future, in the next year to 3 years, you're probably within your organization going to have a chief data officer, and you're going to have data officers sitting in the actual business, as well as data risk officers. And what this means is because data is going to become so critical to your overall business, wider than just IFRS 17, is that you're going to have to understand where your data starts, where it ends, what belongs to you within your landscape, what doesn't belong to you, what you can use, what's private and what's public, etc., etc. And I'll give you a perfect example, something simple. If you download exchange rates off a website and input them into your system for some of the systems or the legacy systems that we've seen in the insurance market, then that process needs data governance to be applied to make sure that the right data has been acquired. But if that data then moves across 4 or 5 different systems and there's transformation that's happening all the time throughout it, what we've seen across a number of organizations is that someone changes a system in the middle and that impacts the integrity of the data coming out in system number 4, which then feeds into an actuarial model. So the ability for you to understand how your data lines up from source all the way through the reporting database that it eventually lands up onto is critical. And data governance is the process of making sure that all the processes in between of how data gets processed from the start all the way to the end is that there's controls built in to make sure that I'm always trusting my data that I have with me. And it's one of the biggest risks for insurance companies, even strategically, because if you can't trust your data, you will never be able to use technologies such as artificial intelligence, machine learning, or any of the cool data science type activities that are occurring within the market. And that's what opens up a nice world for fintechs to come in and play and ultimately to gain market share that you currently have. So I think it's broader than just IFRS 17. It's just the right way to run your business if you want to become a data-driven organization. Next slide. Okay. And data security and cyber risk, it goes without saying. Moving data to the cloud, it does in some ways increase your security and in other ways decrease your security. But what we are seeing across the market at the moment is a cyber attack on your organization and your data could potentially mean the end of your organization. So the amount of work that's been put in the data security space specifically is definitely increasing. And I think with the amounts of data that IFRS 17 is going to generate and the amounts of data that the world is going to generate going forward means that your data security is something you cannot forget, as well as your access to data. I mean, you don't want to share your key information with certain people in the organization, but also you don't want to share all your private information publicly. I think it's an absolutely key risk that needs to be mitigated and addressed. And as the infrastructure and as the introduction of cloud and other emerging technologies comes out, the need for data security and the requirement for data security is going to become absolutely critical. And just a stat so that I can share with you is that it's predicted in the last 18 months, planet Earth has created more data than it did since the inception of planet Earth. And that trajectory is going to increase exponentially going forward, just further illustrate the need for all of the data and the data security practices that are going to be applicable going forward. And I think my colleague Daryl has specifically touched on the InsureHub solution and how it works. I think all of these types of solutions are not possible unless the data feeding them are governed, safe, secure, complete, and accurate before it can be processed by a system that can actually process it through the IFRS 17 model. So to tell you a little bit more about the analytics and the AI capabilities in the InsureHub platform, which all require good data governance, I'm going to hand you back over to Daryl. Thank you.
Great. Thanks again, Evelyn. If we could advance slides. And just one more. This full spectrum of analytics is actually really quite evolved. Nevlin talked about the growth rate of data. We're going to specifically touch on that. But for the purpose of our presentation, we're really going to simplify it down into storage, analysis, and prediction. Our observation is to step into the world of AI and really make it work. We need to get the fundamentals of storage, analysis, and prediction right. And so we'll go into each of these perspectives on the following slides. Next slide, please. You know, when you look at cloud, we've really opened up a new level of data capabilities. Cloud offers cost-effective storage that even just a few years ago we didn't really have. Clients are buying all kinds of data to enrich their sources of the truth and capitalize on market opportunities as a result of that. Cloud makes it easy to connect different types of data, different structures of data together for analytical purposes. And that's really important when you step into the world of data science. Think about the value of being able to connect your internal finance, sales, operations, HR, etc. data to external data sets to create that single source of truth for powerful analytics. How many of us can say we truly have that at our fingertips right now and have that as a competitive advantage? Next slide. You know, the next area we really look at is your analysis capability. The world loves Excel, and but there is far more opportunity out there beyond Excel for analysis capabilities. The business intelligence platforms nowadays have a vast array of capabilities such as dashboards, scorecards, investigative portals, data mining, drill down, spatial analysis, and the list goes on and on and on. And when you step into the world of data science and artificial intelligence, you really have to have great data investigation capabilities to answer the question and the experiment in play, but also answer the question and the experiments around the question. Next slide, please. To us, prediction is really a new level of driving insights from your data. It offers a way to correlate data in new ways and draw new meaning from that data that were even difficult to accomplish even a few years ago. When we look at what most organizations are looking to correlate and looking to get out of stepping into the world of AI, really understanding why something happens is a core workload, and unsupervised learning is a great tool for that. But the other one is really predicting outcomes from events that are about to occur in the future, and really supervised learning is the method to really pursue that. So we're going to go through a client case study where we can show these workloads in action. Next slide, please. We have a case study from an insurance organization in Canada, SEHC, where they built a policy admin platform back in the mid-90s and have been serving the mutual insurance community ever since then. They've continually evolved their platform over time, but the analytics capabilities had lagged behind in serving clients' needs. And so we helped them out, and we established a new data platform. And by establishing a new data platform on the Microsoft Azure stack, we were able to really pivot and transform their organization forward in the ability to serve their customers, being the mutual insurance community. With that great data platform in play, we were able to then step into the world of artificial intelligence and AI, and take on key workloads such as underwriting automation and risk profiling for the insurance industry. And a client in particular, Erie Mutual, leveraged that capability and has been able to manage their risk in a much smarter way than they ever could before. And so Alex is going to take us through what that analytics capability and risk automation has done for Erie Mutual and can do for many in the insurance community.
Great, thank you, Daryl. So I'm now going to do a demo of the solution that we built with SHC and Erie Mutual. So having all of their organization's customer policy, claims, and financial data in one data repository allowed SHC and Erie Mutual to enable analytics and machine learning workloads. At the center of the solution was a customer-centric data model that connects all of the customer data together and allows rich client insights and a 360-degree picture of their customers. This allowed Erie Mutual to understand who their customer was and their behaviors related to the customer, as you can see on this current Customer 360 dashboard. We also have your different perspectives on the left-hand side, including the policy 360, claim 360, and provider 360. Right, so this really provided Erie Mutual and SHC a full picture of how their organization was performing. With analytics enabled, this allowed Erie Mutual to now ask, what else can I do with this? What else can I do with my data? And that's where they started looking at machine learning and AI workloads. Machine learning and AI allows an organization to find efficiencies in their day-to-day operations and to save costs and increase revenues. There are many applications in insurance, including risk modeling for underwriting and customer segmentation for sales. I'm going to walk you through the risk modeling example that we built for Erie. Erie Mutual had an underwriting manual where their underwriters would manually run rules to determine whether to renew a policy. We started by automating all of the 30+ rules in their underwriting manual. And we extended the automation of the rules with 2 predictions. The first prediction is whether or not the customer will make a claim against the policy within the next year. The second prediction is if they made a prediction, a claim, what would the impact of that claim be? Being high impact, low impact, or medium impact. The underwriters now have a renewal report where they're able to see all of the upcoming renewals. And for each policy, they're able to see what are all the rules that passed and the results of the 2 predictions. So for this first policy, you're able to see that it passed all of the high priority rules, and the predictions predicted a 65% chance of a claim within the next year, but their potential impact of that claim is low. What this pre-renewal report allowed Erie Mutual to do is that allowed them to better manage the underwriter's time to be able to focus on high-risk policies, and it also allowed them to ensure that they were underwriting good business rather than bad business. I'll now pass it back to Marnus for some closing thoughts.
Thank you, Alex. Just waiting for the slides to come on. Thank you very much. I think as shown by my colleagues, BDO has the tools on our digital platform, expertise and experience to address the inherent complexities and wide-ranging implications that IFRS 17 will have across your organization. Whether you're large or small, ensure the complex requirements or simply looking to achieve compliance, our team can support you through any stage of the IFRS 17 journey. What we offer through our Insure Hub tool is a cradle-to-grave solution. However, the beauty of this tool is that it is modular in nature, and we can plug it in at any point during your journey to provide you with a variety of solutions. On the slide, we have summarized how we can assist from an advisory point of view, whether it's having a look at your IFRS 17 readiness, making sure that your company is data and technology enabled through the base data ingestion, a data lake, which I have learned that it's the new terminology, data warehouses, but a data connectivity with your insurance, financial and actuarial systems is where we can assist you. And then once you have all of this in place, is where the advanced analytics will come in that Alex just showed you. From an audit perspective, we can utilize Insure Hub as an audit tool to run challenger models on your IFRS 17 assumptions, and utilize the analytics to achieve greater coverage when auditing. Because of the nature of Insure Hub, we are also able to deploy certain of the modules that will not impact on our independence. If you can go to the next slide for me, I just want to take us through some of the statistics. Two of the other questions that we asked you was whether you are currently utilizing AI or machine learning on the data that you have available, and it was a resounding no. And then we also asked you whether you record your data in the form of structured, unstructured, public and personal information, and it's straight down the middle, yes, and then there's some work to do for some of our respondents. But hopefully after today's presentation, you have a clearer view of the risks involved and what you need to do and how we can assist you. And before I close off, Nevlin shared an interesting statistic with us today. He mentioned the stats about how much data has been created. Something else that he shared today was that less than 0.5% of all data that has ever been created has been utilized in analysis, and that by 2025, the global data will grow to 175 zettabyte or zettabyte. Now, if that doesn't scare you, I suggest you Google the impact of what I said, and certainly shows that there's a lot of opportunity for us, coupled with risk. And with that, I'm going to close the presentation, and we're going to go over to the Q&A session. So we've published some of the questions already, and I'll take two of these questions. The first one that was asked is, do you think that insurers will use the easiest obtainable data granularity to drive their IFRS 17 portfolios? As well as a question that IFRS 17 may be seen as a non-value add compliance exercise, and what benefits can I get from the IFRS 17 investment? I think these questions were answered to a certain extent during the presentation, but I think just to summarize what was said, Nevlin mentioned that spending a couple of million or being penny wise and pound foolish. So if you spend by spending a little bit now, you will be able to benefit greatly in future and be able to make that back exponentially. And the reason why we are saying that is by going into a more fit for purpose, future driven insurance company, you are able to keep the threats that insurtechs pose at bay. At the moment, there's 40 plus insurtechs operating throughout Africa, some with greater success than others. And that is certainly something that as an insurer, you can either see as a threat or as an opportunity. A lot of the larger insurers has incorporated some of these insurtechs into their businesses. But we believe there are significant opportunities to use IFRS 17 as a catalyst for further changes needed in your business. You will need to understand why spending more to obtain a greater granularity in contract groupings for valuation purposes will create value for the entire business process. We believe that by having the correct and accurate and rich data available, will provide you with in-time information for various probabilities per product, leading ultimately on a better view on profitability. So then the next question that we have here, Daryl, if you can take this one for me, where they ask about whether the data imported into InsureHub is already split into the different cohorts before calculation happened, or does that happen into, or was it split into the different cohorts? Does that happen in InsureHub itself?
So it's a really good question, and I would say yes, but it depends. And so there is a module within InsureHub to do portfolio management and manage the cohorts for sure. It depends though on the capability of your systems of record. Often insurers aren't interested in adjusting those, but instead pulling the data into a separate system for that portfolio management. The other thing it depends on is what is your calculation engine. If you use the calculation engine within InsureHub, then it leverages the portfolio manager within InsureHub. However, calculation engines like Risk Integrity and others have their own portfolio managers, and at times it makes sense for the data hub to basically be a pass-through into those calculation engines.
Thank you, Daryl. Thanks, Daryl. Nevelyn, if you can please take the next two questions for me that deals with the gaps in POPIA, as well as the application requirements needed for IFRS 17.
Thanks, Monis. I think the gaps in POPIA is an interesting one. I'll give a general view across South Africa, across all clients, and then give a very specific insurance view. So I think the general view coming out is, I think policies and procedures across the market seem to be an area that relatively mature. A lot of work has gone into that. In terms of operationalizing the controls from a policy perspective, that's sitting a bit on the back foot primarily because of COVID. A lot of people being out of the office haven't had a chance, especially with physical documents. And one of the key things being driven by CFOs across the country is to move completely paperless. I think it's far easier to control data than it is to control manual paper. And then to give a very specific insurance view, I think the one area that's sort of been not really considered is third-party service providers, or some of the UMAs in the insurance industry where there's outsourced claims processing or outsourced premium processing and even outsourced actuarial. The policy, I think they're getting to a policy state now where they're actually thinking about it and considering the impact. But we've picked up quite a few insurers, especially in the mid-tier type insurers, who haven't even considered the impact of third-party service providers on their overall privacy requirements. And on the larger type insurers, what we are seeing is their ability to identify all of the third parties that are playing a role in their environment, especially in the IT space, because I think IT, in terms of some of the cybersecurity monitoring, etc., has a lot of data fed to potentially third-party service providers, and these weren't really identified as key business players. However, some private information was moving across from that side. In terms of the next question, in terms of what kind of application requirements are needed for IFRS 17, I'm making an assumption here that when you say application requirements, you're talking about the technology requirements needed for IFRS 17. I think the current legacy systems that are in place, some of them have some levels of data, but I've seen some insurers play with the idea now of actually taking data from their legacy systems, processing it in a separate environment or a cloud modeling environment, which they can then effectively superimpose some of the market data or other alternate data for purposes of feeding their IFRS 17 models. So from a requirements perspective, I think the current legacy systems can work, but I think you're probably going to end up being redundant very quickly by sticking with your legacy system. And I know that's easier said than done with the amount of investment required to move or change your systems. But I think one of the key tools that can be used where you can keep your legacy systems and still almost comply with IFRS 17 is to build in high levels of automation. So I've had the pleasure of seeing an insurance company using a legacy system with a lot of robotics to effectively automate the processes from initiation all the way through to recording. And what that means is that while everything looks manual, it's actually sped up and automated to such an extent due to the robotics that have been built in. And look, introducing robotics into the environment can lead to higher processing power as well as more efficiency. But when robots go wrong, they go wrong at a large extent because it repeats the wrong thing over and over. So robotic governance, or robot RPA, robot process automation governance, is something critical that insurers that have gone down the robotics path is something that they are looking at. Thank you, Manas.
Thank you, Nev. I don't think anyone was coming to an IFRS 17 webinar expected to be talking about robots going rogue. So the next question I want to pose to either Daryl or Alex. Gentlemen, you're welcome to take this for me. And that's the two questions that relate to whether InsurHub has have an CSM calculation engine and actuarial models. So I know the answer there, but I think if you can maybe answer that on both the PAA and GMM model, and then also are the insurance risks analysis and other analytics. I think this one person wants to know whether it's only applicable to short-term insurance or the benefit they can see in life, specifically in this case funeral insurance. So those are the last two questions that's currently published. If you can take.
Sure, Marnus, I can take both those on. So from an actual calculation capability within InsurHub, so the calculation capability is primarily associated with the premium allocation approach measurement model. We do have plugins when we go into the general model and other models of calculation, and that's where I was talking about the integration with platforms such as Risk Integrity and others where applicable. With respect to funeral insurance, we would need to take a look at the contract life cycle. It would be likely within the general measurement model, and that would require a tool like Risk Integrity from Moody's to be able to leverage to tie together the end-to-end.
Daryl, if I can just add on, right, because I think the question might have been about their applicability of machine learning AI models in terms of risk for other lines of business, right? And we have, I think it is applicable to all different lines of business where you want to understand when you're underwriting policies, which policies are good policies to underwrite and which policies are not so good to underwrite, right? And so what you would go through in the machine learning process is to understand what features are important to each line of business, and it would be different for each of their lines of business, right? But it can be applied, such models can be applied to all different lines of business, not just say P&C or health or life. It can be applied to any line of business.
Perfect. Thanks. Thank you, gentlemen. Thanks, gentlemen. Before I ask a question to Nev, just to follow up on what Daryl said around the general measurement model, and something we alluded to earlier about InsurHub being modular. And I think the beauty of this that we have found is, although there is already certain built-in information and data, you are able to customize it and put your own assumptions and own data in there that will then be able to run automatically. So especially around life and longer policies using the GMM, you are able to customize your own actuarial model in there. And then just on the question about the life and funeral. I think Alex has addressed that. But to the same point we made earlier, the example that was shown was for short term, but you can certainly apply that across the board with the different type of insurance policies. It all depends on the information that you pull in that can then benchmark for you, and also run it against that to see how it is performing based on what you initially expected it to do versus how it's performing right now, and that's where the in-time information part comes in. So Nevelyn, there are two questions that I wanted you to address. I just want to see if there's any new ones that come in. Okay, so I'm going to publish this one as well. So Nev, you're going to close us out with 3 questions. There is one more question that asks, when is the standard applicable from? It's the 1st of January 2023. The standard will be applicable. But as with any new accounting standards, you will have to have prior year numbers restated. So you'll have to have the information available. So Nevelyn, if you can please answer the following questions for me. The one deals with how does someone know whether their data is of high quality or well governed. Another one is about how do we fill the gap in the systems, processes and data. And I think then linked to that, what are the key considerations to affect the change required in culture and people's behavior to ensure data quality and management? If you can answer those 3 and then hand back to me, and I'll close it out for us. Thank you, Nev.
Okay, sorry, Monis, I'm going to ask you just to repeat question 1 for me, and then I think ask me them one at a time.
Okay. Will do. I just need to find them again. Okay, so the first question, Nev, is how do you determine when your data is of high quality or well governed? What are the key aspects to look at and consider prior to being able to process the data for IFRS 17 requirements?
Okay, thanks, Monis, and thanks for the question. I think that's a very good question because what are the metrics that you use to measure your data governance? So at a very macro level, one of the questions that's been asked to CEOs in a recent survey that's been done is, would you trust an algorithm to run on the data that's being provided in order to make decisions for your business without any human intervention? Now, that's a very macro question. And from the responses that came out from them globally, 96% of CEOs of large corporates said they wouldn't trust the data to be used for decision-making processes, specifically where a computer made them automatically. They would want a piece of human intervention in space. Whereas some of them said on key financial decisions they would be comfortable, but not in terms of operational decisions. So in terms of understanding how your data is that ultimately when you are taking data from different sources and different spaces, it's about how much of trust you as the user using it for the purpose that you want to use it for will actually place in it, or how much of manual workaround you'd need to do before you actually use that data. And if your current view is that, no, I've got no manual workaround around anything, I go in, the data's over there, I'm happy for it to feed into whatever I require it to do, and then being comfortable, then that's fine. The other key consideration to consider is, as changes are being made in your system or changes are made to your processes, do you still trust the data that's coming out? And we often see this in the IT space where a change happens in the system and suddenly finance people are screaming and shouting that a report that existed doesn't have the fields, or it doesn't have the right data, or it doesn't reconcile. If this sounds familiar to you on the webinar today, it probably points towards poor data governance processes, because a change was made without considering the impact of data as well as the different users that were using the data. And then the third thing, which is something that we often do on a lot of our audit clients specifically, is once we extract the data, there's certain metrics that we have that we run across fields that are not really quantitative in nature, because those are easier to tie up to your trial balances or tie up to another source that give you comfort, but more around qualitative data. So we recently did an exercise for an insurance client of ours in the audit space, where we looked at the gender of the claimants that were coming through. And what we found was the system was automatically configured to make all companies female. So in the data, when we looked at it, we said this is a high proportion of claims for females. And when we broke down into the detail, we saw that all of their corporate entities got stored as females, which distorted all of the results. And these types of data cleansing techniques or data governance statistics that we can run over data give you an idea in terms of how governed the data is, both from a financial perspective as well as from a non-financial perspective. Thanks, Manus. Next one.
Nev, so the next one is, how do we fill the gap in our systems, processes, and data?
Okay, so gaps in systems, processes, and data, that is exactly what your transformation process will involve, okay? So I think if we work backwards, and I'm just going to focus on IFRS 17, I can talk a lot about this in terms of using data for running your business, but let's just focus on IFRS 17 for purposes of answering the question. So I think there's a choice that needs to be made. So once you sort of have an idea in terms of which way your IFRS 17 model is going to look like and what your data requirements are, you effectively need a system and a process that's running that creates that data that you need. When you get to that point, you've got two choices. One is, how can I change my existing system to cater for the requirements that I have? The second part that you need to look at is, if I can't change it, how do I still operate in a legacy environment, but potentially use automation type techniques to actually do that? And the third thing is actually having a roadmap in terms of how you transform in that environment. And the beauty with the technology space at the moment is there's so many choices available. Do you follow an outsource model where you outsource some of your systems? Do you move into the cloud? Do you go into an on-premise type solution? Do you employ people, or do you restructure your teams to focus around data governance? And I know one of the key things that always comes out when we do presentations around automation specifically is, what are all the people that are doing these jobs that are going to be automated away? What are they going to do after this? And I think data governance is a field that will probably increase in terms of the number of people that need to be employed in that space, and probably represents new job opportunities that will come out from there. But I think to summarize is that I think it's going to be very hard for any finance executive sitting on the call with us today, or any business person, to justify the full cost of IFRS 17 as being merely a compliance exercise. I don't think you're going to be able to justify the business case unless strategically as an organization you can say, we're going to run a data governance project that's going to result in us firstly meeting IFRS 17, but also finding different ways to open up new markets, run our business in a more cost-effective way, and ultimately strategically be competitive and grow our market share in our respective markets. And I think that's probably going to be the number one thing. If you want a business case to make all of these changes in your environment and change the way you are currently doing business, to do it just for the purposes of complying with an insurance standard is never going to be good enough. So you're going to have to define ways in order to make yourself a more of a business or data-led organization, which is a term that's thrown around quite loosely at the moment, and then say, based on us being a data-led organization and achieving those objectives, these are the key strategic avenues that open up for us in terms of new markets or decreased cost or increased revenues in order to justify the business case. Because I think the spend is far too large. I think our large insurance companies are probably on that journey already to become data-driven organizations. It's part of their key strategic indicators that they focused on. But also they can get away in some of the larger organizations by doing large implementations as part of their compliance spends. But I think your mid-tier and smaller insurance companies with the cost of compliance without the differentiation of the business will leave you in a very difficult position to justify the business case of spending this amount of money, unless you decide to go for a solution, a cloud-based solution where you just pass data and it's a pure compliance exercise. And if that is the case, I then start to ask questions around long-term sustainability of a business like that, considering you are going to be competing against data-led organizations. Thanks, Manus. I think there's one more.
Thank you, Nev. I'm going to ask Daryl to firstly give me his view from a Canadian perspective and what they've seen on the following one. And that is, what are the key considerations to affect the change required in culture and people's behavior to ensure data quality and management? So Daryl, if you can please first give me the Canadian perspective and your view on it before we hand back to Nev, and then I'll close us out.
Great, thanks, Marnus. This is a great question. This is all about enabling a data-driven culture, and many clients, many organizations are moving forward with this, to Nevlin's point. And so first off, there's no one-size-fits-all. Careful consideration needs to be made, and this question really touches on them. So I would say that first off, an analysis to your current data and analytics operating model needs to be conducted, and there are a number of best practices models out there, but it all depends on the type of organization. If you're a distributed organization by nature, that would be a very different operating model than a centralized organization, just as an example. And then from there, you know, a data governance program is really required to ensure ownership and stewardship of data, the right check and balances, the right controls, and the right levels of application of each of those. Again, depending on the overall culture and the framework of your organization. And then finally, training and enablement of the organization is another key one. If you're an organization where the analytics and data capability is distributed across the functional groups, that's a different strategy than a center of excellence type of model or a centralized type of model, where all that capability is centralized and then shared out amongst the organizations as required. So those would be three key areas that I would say would be considerations. And again, the way you progress with that depends on the type of organization that you are and the appetite for change.
Thank you, Daryl. Nev, is there anything that you wanted to add to what Daryl said?
Yeah, I definitely agree with Daryl. And maybe to give a South African flavor to the same question, I think what we've seen, there are few shining stars in the insurance industry and in financial services specifically, but I'd say the vast majority of large organizations and large corporates in the financial services space have not taken data governance very seriously. And I think CEOs are trying to figure out, how do we drive this culture of data within our organization where people cherish the data as much as they would a fixed asset, as an example. So if you become, and to give you an idea in terms of the culture change required, if we talk about data as being an asset, I think it's something I referred to a few times. If data is an asset, you should effectively have it in a data register or an asset register, so to speak. So a great concept that was used by a CEO that I spoke to recently was that he said to me, if I lend a company car to an employee, they will treat it well, they will drive it, they will make sure it's insured, they'll make sure that all the controls and processes are put in place. And if there's a scratch on the car, there's obviously consequences for the person who potentially scratched the car or crashed the car, and they've got effectively as well insurance in space. He said, if you then flip that on its head and you say, okay, data is also one of the assets that I give to my employees that they get access to as part of being an employee in the organization. And he said they don't have the same regard towards that data as they would a company car. And until we get to a point from a cultural perspective, and that means your key performance indicators, your way of remunerating your employees, the way you actually benchmark your employees, until it becomes in terms of how they've treated and stored and the processes that have been run out in terms of data are as effective as what's going on in terms of using a company car as an example, I think there's going to be challenges in terms of that overall cultural change. And I think the change management issue is quite large when you think about the fact that a lot of the people that are working in these environments, they've been doing this for the past maybe 10 or 15 years. In order to change them into a data-led organization is going to be incredibly difficult, and it's something they're going to have to achieve in order to make sure they are relevant to the tech companies that could potentially be out there. And maybe to give a great example of innovation and competition is that within the Google team at the moment, there's a specific financial services focus within a specific team that's been set up. And if they come out with an insurance offering out of Google that is cheaper, complies with the regulation in South Africa, we could potentially have a global player coming in and stealing up market share at costs that we've never seen before. I think one of the greatest protections in South Africa has been the regulation. But I think as we start moving towards something, well, in the banking world that we called open banking, and could easily be leveraged into open insurance to effectively leverage the global markets that are available, that could be a huge threat to, well, all financial services institutions actually in the country. So I think this view around changing the culture, it's becoming an imperative and probably quite top of the agenda on most of the CEOs that we speak to at the moment across the financial services businesses.
Thank you for that, Nev. I think I speak from experience when I say that in BDO Financial Services, with Nev as the voice, it's certainly being driven that our culture is one of embracing technology, and you cannot help but listen in awe when people like Nev and Daryl speak about data and technology. And Shanaz, thank you very much again for your contribution, and I look forward to webinars coming up where we are going to spend more time on the technical accounting and actuarial side of matters. And then also thank you, Alex, for taking us through the demo, and to Londiwe and Justine working behind the scenes, as well as Lee that helped us set it up. So thank you very much, everyone, for attending. Our contact details are on the screen right now, and please be on the lookout for this webinar that will be shared, so that you can share it with your contacts that weren't able to attend today. So a recording will be made available, and then we will also be hosting the next webinar shortly. Please complete the survey if you haven't done so already, so we can know where we can improve in future, and also what you are looking for in terms of more information and future webinars. Thank you very much, and have a good day.